Hello, welcome to the Wonder and Whimsy Podcast. I'm Kimberly, and this is.
Marianne.
And today we'll be talking about a wonderful book called The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. So please subscribe to this channel if you like philosophy, literature, and just deep conversations. Subscribe to this channel, click that notification bell so you never miss a podcast. And yeah, let's get started. So, what did you think about this book?
Oh man.
Loaded
It's
question.
it's long. It's
Yes,
long. But gosh, what year was it published? 41?
1941.
1941. For a book published back in the day, it is sure relevant now. I mean,
Absolutely.
is woman a companion? Is she a servant? Is she a Madonna? Is she a whore? Is she property? Is she a goddess? Um, the concept of defining femininity, I think, is something that is as relevant today as it's ever been, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed the book. It was long. I like that, she's writing from her perspective in France, and it is mostly about women and a woman's role as defined by society, social constructs, and culture, obviously. She doesn't talk too much about women from all over the world. She mostly focuses on her culture, the middle class. But I was okay with that just because it's still very poignant and fascinating. She's basically like an existentialist philosopher, and the book is is basically presenting an existential phenomenology philosophy. So this isn't necessarily um, talking about the nature of a woman. It's just talking about the situation of a woman, the phenomenology. And it gets pretty deep, and I loved it. I mean, it really does make you think about a woman's identity and how it has evolved. In 1941, this concept that a woman isn't born a woman, that she becomes a woman based on social constructs, and looking at the difference between a biological sex and gender. Your biological sex is your sexual organs that you're born with, but gender as a performative social construct. So I really like that idea. And yeah, I mean, parts of it were very wordy, but in general, I think it's really thought-provoking, and it really does kind of raise a lot of interesting questions about what defines a woman.
I definitely think that the first half is a lot stronger than the second half. Um, I have this thing, it's the same way I feel about plays. I always want things to be really streamlined and concise, you know? But I do wonder, something that I kept thinking the entire time as I was reading it was, what would she think now if she were to write this book? What
Yeah.
would Simone de Beauvoir think about, social media and what that's, how we all perceive ourselves through social media and things of that nature.
I had those thoughts as well. I like that she uses humor and irony a lot.
hmm
I think that's a really effective way of writing, making you laugh a little bit. And I think one of the things I love most about this book is that she doesn't place blame. She's not blaming men for a woman's role in society. She's not blaming women. She's basically saying we are all accountable. We are all responsible for the limitations we put on our social identity. So this isn't like a man-hating book,
Yeah.
which it could have been. Like going into it, I wondered if this was going to be sort of like, oh, it's all men's fault. But sometimes as women, it's our responsibility to break free of some sort of mold if we want to.
Yeah.
So I like that
Yeah.
it's very much fair to both men, women, male, female.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I think that it's one of the first books of its kind that I've ever read that is very much like part of the, the reason that things have been the way they've been is because women, essentially she's making the point that because traditionally women had to rely on men and were dependent on them, they were isolated from each other. And so, as like a female community, essentially disenfranchised, separated, and thereby incapable of like taking a stand, etc., etc.
mhm.
Which is a really valid point. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, the first part of the book is it sort of talks about like, okay, who has a right to write about women?
Yeah.
We should all have
Yeah.
a right to write about women. There are a lot of men who write about women. Um, and
Well, and
it
she even says, she's like, don't trust a man who writes about women.
yeah. But I mean, as far as like the point of view,
Yeah.
it's and I don't know. I think it would be helpful to just kind of start with some quotes, because to try to generalize the entire book is like impossible. Because it
Yeah.
starts with biology. You know, she talks a little bit about biology and how women are perceived based on biology, and then a woman's role and how it has been shaped by society and how there's like this contradictory expectations. You know, on one hand, women of her time were expected to, you know, raise children, get married, be that nurturing force, and then on the other hand, women were also expected to step out of that role. And women were criticized for doing both. Like, well, if you're just staying home at raising a baby, that's lame. But if you're out in the workforce, you're not really. So women of her time were basically sort of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's like, how do I find my role here? Um,
I still think it's the same. I think like if you're, let's say you're a woman in 2025 in a corporate role and you happen to be a mother, you are still expected to, you know, pull the full weight of the childcare plus the work. It's a lot. One of the quotes that we wanted to talk about was here, I'll read it. So the how it's impossible to kind of be a woman because it's a construct.
mhm.
Misogynists have often reproached intellectual women for letting themselves go, but they also preach to them, if you want to be our equals, stop wearing makeup and polishing your nails. This advice is absurd, precisely because the idea of femininity is artificially defined by customs and fashions. It is imposed on every woman from the outside. The individual is not free to shape the idea of femininity at will. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Um, Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So
significance of women's attire is evident. It is decoration, and to be decorated means to be offered.
yeah. So, you know, like women are criticized for embracing traditional femininity as like superficial or vain, and then women are also criticized for rejecting it as unattractive or undesirable. And so it's a contradiction that shows that femininity is not an inherent trait, but it's a set of external rules that change based on social expectations. And I love how she words like decorating, like are women defined by what they wear? You know, like how can you say what a woman wears is a fair assessment for defining who she is? I mean, I get that like what you wear can is a form of expression, but I also like this idea about how much fashion does play into the social construct of a woman. For instance, pants, okay? Um, Pants nowadays, like in 2025, women and men can wear pants. But still today in 2025, it's considered feminine to wear a skirt. So if a man wears a skirt, that's considered kind of racy or, feminine, right?
Right.
But nowadays, pants can be masculine and feminine. However, even in 2025, there's still clothing items that are only affiliated with femininity. And I find that interesting.
I would argue that that's because so the whole core idea behind this book is that woman is the other. So if
Hmm.
if man is the main character, woman is the supporting character. If he's human 1.0, she's human 1.A. So pants are the norm. Pants are what everybody theoretically comes out with, basically. So
Hmm.
a skirt, oof. Yeah, I think that also kind of traces back to I have this theory that everybody secretly hates women, actually. I think that that's a thing that people don't talk about enough. And I think that by proxy, things that are considered feminine sometimes are inherently viewed negatively. Um, oh, what was the other thing that you mentioned that made me think? Oh, also, this conversation totally translates to trans women
Hmm.
who, you know, are criticized for wearing makeup, criticized for wearing heels, doing their nails, and at the same time, there's this huge societal pressure for them to like pass or blend in with cis women.
Hmm.
Um, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And this notion of what defines feminine, I mean, does a trans woman have to wear lipstick and heels and nail polish to be considered a woman? I mean, can we reduce what's feminine to just what you wear? And you said something really interesting, that your theory that everyone hates women. Um, I feel like there is this concept that originated back in the day that is still prevalent today, maybe not as consciously, um, maybe more subconsciously, that, men represents positivity, or masculine is positive, feminine is negative. And I keep catching myself here because what Boudoir often says is that, okay, there's a big difference between your biological sex and your gender. How we can say I'm a woman or I'm a man based on biology. But when it comes to female and male, that's a socially performative gender, and gender is the social construct. So, but there's some overlap. So yeah, but I am curious more about this theory of everyone secretly hates women. I mean, I guess if that's true, I mean, I feel like it's easy for men to hate women if they feel like women have a power over them.
Mhm.
Because if, men often tell me things like, oh, well, women have all the power in dating in 2025 because they have something that I want. Seeing a beautiful woman makes their hormones go crazy. So they have this power over me. So I resent a woman because she has power over my penis, you know?
Well,
Um, and
yeah.
and it's easy for a woman to resent another woman if we're comparing each other and if we're trying to um, compete, if we view each other as competition and then one woman seems to have it all, like, and the other woman doesn't, you start comparing yourself, then it's easy to resent. So I don't know if that supports your theory or not that everyone hates women, but
No, it does. It does. And like obviously that is a mass generalization.
yeah.
But I do think that at the end of the day, it's a subliminal thing that I don't think that women are consciously hating themselves or anything. But something that's always kind of blown my mind is, a woman is such a powerful creature. She can literally portal in a soul from another dimension and like build another human body over the course of 9 months. I think that there's something very mysterious and powerful about that men are afraid of, and that, women, like back in the day, hysteria was a word described solely for women.
Hmm.
And I love that word, hysteria,
Hmm.
hysterical.
I think that was
Um,
A Freudian concept.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I think that there is this kind of like mysterious ability that women have to be like, okay, I'm gonna go through something like insane and give birth to this baby, right? But I think that because not meaningfulness, but identity and visibility as a woman is so often through the eyes of men that you're right. I think that there's the competitive aspect. Not that men don't have that as well, but I think that if given the option, most people are going to choose a they trust men more, even though men and women are obviously, you know, you can't say that one is smarter or better than the other. But I do think that in general, you'll find in life that if a man gives a presentation and a woman gives a presentation in a meeting or something, if the man is like, this is how it is, he might not even have thought it through very well. But if he speaks confidently and he's just like, this is what I did, this is how it is. And if somebody acts feminine and speaks in a higher voice and is just a little bit less direct and these like stereotypically female feminine qualities, you're going to choose the more determined seeming person's idea, right?
Hmm.
So yeah.
That's a really interesting point because I have a lot of female friends that naturally talk in a higher voice and their inflection, is a little lighter. It's a little more
Unsure.
unsure. It's almost like it comes off like it's more unsure.
Yeah.
Um, because of their inflection and because of their high-pitched voice. And it's crazy because they could be saying something that is very intelligent and very grounded in reality and very important. But if a man is saying something and he just speaks with like a certain inflection or speaks with a certain tone, you subconsciously might trust it more just
Right.
because he's speaking in his lower register and he's like speaking as if it's fact,
Well,
you
and that's
know?
not to say that like if you flip it and if it's like a woman speaking confidently, but and
Yeah.
it's a man who's a bit more unsure of himself, you
Yeah.
still might go for the male's
You think
thing.
so?
Maybe it might be swapped
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
But I definitely think so. So I have a corporate day job and I was in a meeting back when I first started and I didn't know anything about the industry I was working in. I was in a meeting with a client and somebody who was like at least 3 tiers above me in the organization. And it was this, really brilliant woman, like truly one of the smartest people that I know. But she talks like this and she is always sort of asking for permission to be there and like share, you know? And I talk sort of stridently. I even if I don't know what I'm talking about, I'll be like, "Yes, the sky is orange." And the client kept looking at me and asking me the questions because they felt, I think, that I knew what I was talking about, even though I had no idea what I was talking about. So, and that's if we want to link it to another thing that's very prevalent these days, especially on social media, especially with like podcast culture, is people talking about women living in their masculine energy versus their feminine energy. Same thing with men. I think that that is something that people like to talk about a lot. And I think that there is some validity in that. I think that, sometimes when I'm in the workplace, I will purposely be a bit more like, no, this is how it is,
Hmm.
Um, I don't like that, but it gets the job done. But, can you say that that is just a Marianne thing, or is it taking advantage of perceptions? I don't know.
Yeah. I think that depending on the job I'm working, I change up the way I speak all the time. Naturally, I think naturally my voice is a little lower, but if I'm in certain contexts, I notice it's an unconscious thing, but I will change the way that I speak.
Hmm.
Um, like if I'm talking to children, I typically I'll change the way it depends on who I'm
Oh,
talking
yeah.
to. Or what's crazy is like I find myself changing the way I talk depending on if I'm talking to a man or a woman. Because I think that, okay, a man's going to respect me more if I speak with like a deeper voice, with more self-assurance, and a woman is going to find me less intimidating, or a woman is going to, I need to be softer with a woman. I'm
Hmm.
not saying consciously, but I think subconsciously that's why my vocal tone will naturally change because somewhere in my subconscious I think, okay, well, if I'm talking to a woman, I have to be a little sweeter. I have to
Interesting.
I have to be a little softer. Whereas like a man can handle it if I'm just straightforward, right?
Huh.
Like it's crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
There's this incredible video that I hope it's real. I think it's real from the 80s. It's like a job training thing, and it's this woman talking about the different ways of speaking in order to be perceived the way you want to be perceived.
yeah.
Um, 40s, 80s, 2025. What a conundrum.
I know. I love this book is often considered like the Bible of feminism because Boudoir addresses feminism in a way that isn't necessarily pointing fingers at just men or just women, but it is bringing to light these stereotypes that we often kind of forget. As I was reading this book, I was reminded how when I was like a young child, even like an adolescent and a teenager, I was super shy and I didn't like girly things
Mm,
growing up. Like I didn't care about jewelry. I hated makeup, but I felt like I had to put on makeup to look my best, to be presentable. But I didn't enjoy. I didn't have fun. Some
yeah,
girls really just love the art, and it's an art form. I get it, but I hated nail polish. I didn't care about jewelry. I didn't care about fashion. So all this stereotypical female things I couldn't relate to. I also didn't like crossing my legs. Like it felt un physically uncomfortable to cross my legs. And I think that it's actually not the healthiest position. Like it's more of a
no.
natural, healthy position to sit with your legs open.
Hmm.
Um, but, growing up, I would notice, as like, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year, I would see women always crossing their legs. And I knew I was a woman, so I felt like okay, I have to do these things that don't really come natural to me.
Right.
Um, so so yeah, it's just interesting because I very much can understand what Boudoir is saying about gender is a performative social construct. And it does make you kind of question, like, okay, well, if we were raised in a society where there weren't these stereotypes, like, would I curl my hair? Like, would I want to put on makeup? You know what I mean? Like, would I want to wear dresses or would I want to just be comfortable? And
Right. Yeah, I grew
so,
up with a mom who she like has perfect smooth skin and she doesn't wash her face. I mean, she washes her face in the shower with like water. She doesn't use soap. She doesn't put lotion on her face. She doesn't wear makeup, nothing like that. And yet she's still a very feminine woman, you know.
mhm,
I think in the book, Beauvoir talks about how, you know, being a woman is a construct, but a woman is formed in her childhood. And
mhm,
I think that everyone can see that very clearly. If you can't see that, you're lying to yourself. If you have siblings, like let's say boys and girls, you know that society is going to expect the girl to know how to do all sorts of household things. She's got to know how to make food. She's got to know how to do all these things to make other people's lives better. Whereas boys, I think in my experience, tend to be treated more so like, oh, well, he's going to form into whatever he's gonna be. We have to give him space and, I mean, gosh, I do hope that there's lots of guys out there whose moms taught them how to do laundry and things of that nature. But like, you would be shocked the things that I've encountered with men that I've dated and, horror stories I've heard from my friends who like their ex-boyfriends will call them up and ask them how to make rice, things of this nature. Women are taught at a very early age that they exist for other people, I think. Um, And
Yeah.
that means part of that is you got to be pretty to look at. And you know, I I went through a hippie phase when I was an undergrad. I say a hippie phase, I still totally don't obsessively shave my legs or anything. But at that time, I like never shaved my legs because I was like angry at the world.
Against it. Yeah.
I was like, I hate everybody. And somebody looked at my legs. It was another girl, and she was like, "You look like a monkey." And I was so ashamed, and I like immediately went home and shaved my legs. And then I got ashamed that I let her make me feel ashamed.
Right. Yeah. It shouldn't
Yeah.
matter like if your legs are shaved or not. That to me, I feel you there. I completely understand that. I grew up, I remember when I was like 10 years old, I thought, "Oh my gosh, it's gonna be fun because I get to shave my legs now that my hair's growing." Because I thought it was like almost like a rite of passage, like, "Oh, now I can shave my legs. Yeah, I'm a
I'm a
grown
woman
up.
now.
I'm a grown up girl. I get to shave my legs." And then as I got to be a little older and my hair grows back, so it's a chore. Like I don't enjoy shaving my legs. It's annoying. Like guys don't have to shave their legs and they're still considered like sexy,
Mhm.
right? But girls, I mean, we have to shave our legs, our armpits, be well groomed in all the areas.
Well, and I like if you trace that back, that's truly shaving companies trying to make more money.
Yeah.
It was a thing developed by advertising in magazines back in the
Mhm.
day. And now it's kind of devolved into this whole political message. And I also think that, the reasons for it are perhaps not so great. I often think about how it's just like, oh yeah, you totally shave. That's just what it's what is expected. And before, I don't know what year everybody started shaving, but I think it was, maybe like 60s, 70s.
Somewhere
Before
around
then,
there.
women had hairy legs and they were still considered women.
Yeah, they had hairy legs and hairy genitalia, and
Yeah,
they were
yeah,
like
full
considered
bush.
sexy and like still, yeah. So, and yeah, but when you think about like the origins of all that stuff, it makes sense. And then it's kind of a stupid thing that we do. It's basically like a form of mutilation. Like shaving is a form of mutilation. Even cutting your hair is a form of self-mutilation. Tanning beds are a form of self-mutilation. Most makeup is actually toxic. So there's
I, yeah,
there's all
the
these
way,
forms of self-mutilation that we do to try to keep up with these silly beauty standards that don't really have any practical merit, you
yeah.
know?
I definitely sometimes I'll be putting makeup on and I'll be like, oh, and I'm like, this is like literally hurting me. It's like suffer for fashion, suffer for beauty. And, why? It's because from time and memoriam, the Bible said that Eve was made out of a rib, so she's
Hmm.
thereby not this like fully sentient separate being. And because it's her fault that the serpent, she eats the apple, henceforth everything can be blamed on her. And
Yeah.
that means she has to toe the line, I guess.
That's a great point. And that's another thing I really love about this book because Beauvoir talks about the mythic. One of her sections, it's called Myths versus Facts, right? And how the myth of a woman, and that's like a great myth, how, it was man was first and women were the secondary sex. Man came first, Adam came first, and then a woman just came out of Adam's rib. And there's a lot of other stories um, out there that have that same sort of myth that, and even in our writings, our historical writings, even like ancient philosophers, you read these like ancient philosophical texts and it's always man. They're using the term man to define all of humanity.
Yes.
That still happens today. But yeah, I mean, oftentimes in history and even today, we use the term man to refer to women and men, all humankind. So, in that sense, women are definitely uh, the second sex. And this concept of like othering us, we all have a consciousness, but when someone else has a consciousness, we naturally perceive that as they are the other. They are the other, right?
Yes.
So, so yeah, I mean, I don't know how to I don't really know how to kind of break free and be completely equal. Uh, I feel like we've come a long way since like 1941. Um,
Yes.
I feel like we have come a long way, and there is more equality than there used to be. There is less classifying women according to stereotypes and reducing women to only, raising the babies or there is less of that, but it's still very, very much ingrained in our society and like you said, even our subconscious mind. Like I feel like I still have to look my best because I know as a woman in society, so much of my worth is based on what I look like in the male gaze, but also in like the female gaze. Like, women are programmed to look their best, to put on makeup, to do their hair, to look pretty or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's very easy for another woman to judge another woman like, "Oh, why are you dressed like that? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like you need a haircut or." So I feel like I always have to look my best because I feel like so much of how other people, not necessarily how I perceive myself, but how other people perceive me is based on what I look like.
Yes. And that in turn informs your self-image. Um, I can't, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name properly, but today there was this really weird thing that happened in the Oval Office where the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, got into a fight with the president and the vice president. I don't know if it was real or if it was something that was staged. But all I could think, because I was thinking about this book when I saw this news, I was thinking, I feel as though Simone de Beauvoir talks about woman being the other in this book. And that seems like a kind of innocuous concept, but actually, in life, when people get othered, it's actually kind of dangerous. So, for instance, the United States right now, I think, is on a slow roll to like very nationalistic. I would hesitate to even say patriotic. I think it's nationalistic at this point. I
Hmm.
feel as though what our media is doing and what the people in charge are doing is they are literally othering the entire planet. It's like pitting the United States against everyone else. And I know that's probably how all countries feel. They're like, Russia against everyone else, France against everyone else. But I think that what it does is it sows these seeds of distrust and it's just making the whole situation rife for a blow up to happen. Um, which is getting a little bit off topic, but I'm trying to make the point that it's dangerous to be the other. I mean, people of color can tell you that.
Hmm.
Um, I grew up in a really conservative environment and I was homeschooled, and I felt like I was the other. And I actually still kind of feel like the other. I feel like I exist somewhat outside of societal perception sometimes, even though it's been a very long time since I was homeschooled. I've changed quite significantly since then, but it being othered and it affecting your identity, it's a real thing.
Oh, yeah. And you make a great point that it's not just women who are othered by men. It's nations that other nations. It's races that other races. It's cultures that other cultures. Like this is our tribe. That's the other tribe instead of looking at us all like equal human beings. And I do feel like we're getting closer to equality than we were in
Oh yeah.
1941, but we're still not there.
Well, I think that it brings forth like a whole slew of other issues, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of women would say, especially mothers, like the domestic labor, the child labor versus the labor of making the money to feed our faces. It's complicated. If a woman, women are the main breadwinners of most households, I believe, these days, at
Mhm.
least in the United States. Um, I think that's why people I mean, abortion is a charged issue regardless. But I think that's particularly why people get so upset about it, is because if a woman is pro-choice, I think that it's as though she's going against her nature.
Hmm.
Um, that goes to one of these other quotes that we wanted to talk about. Enforced maternity brings into the world wretched infants whom their parents will be unable to support and who will become the victims of public care or child martyrs. It must be pointed out that our society, so concerned to defend the rights of the embryo, shows no interest in the children once they're born. It prosecutes the abortionists instead of undertaking to reform that scandalous institution known as public assistance. Those responsible for entrusting the children to their torturers are allowed to go free. Society closes its eyes to the frightful tyranny of brutes in children's asylums and private foster homes. Um, I really, I think that I am scared. Sorry, I'm not trying to make this like super political, but
That's fine. Yeah.
the vice president, when he took office, he said something along the lines of, I want more American babies. I don't blame him. Millennials aren't having kids. You know, I get it.
Hmm.
If I was a politician, I would probably be freaking out about that too. Thankfully, I'm not. But my concern is that what's going to happen is we're going to, make it really difficult for women to live unless they are married, mothers, etc., etc. This is going to feed further into these gender norms where you're supposed to, everything that you do is supposed to make you appealing to men, etc., etc. Perhaps I'm insane for saying all this, but that's where my brain goes when I read stuff like this. If you make it really difficult for people to avoid getting pregnant, etc., you have a lot of power over them.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Boudoir also talks about the hypocrisy of this idea that certain groups feel very strongly that abortion is wrong, right? That you shouldn't abort an embryo, yet they celebrate and glorify murdering people in war.
Yeah,
So that's pretty ironic and kind of hypocritical. It's like, no, I want to protect life. I want to make sure that life is protected with, and women should always give birth. Yet it's a great thing if I kill someone, if I kill human life in war. That's a
yeah,
great thing. So that feels pretty hypocritical to me. If
yeah,
you can hold both of those, like, yes, I am pro-life, but I'm also pro-war, you
yeah,
know? And men in the military are often celebrated for destroying life. And, women create life with the help of a man. She also talks about how men and women have to create life together, that the woman bears the child in her body, in her womb. But, she still needs man to do that, right? So, but yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. Like the idea of having control over a woman's body and not giving the woman the free choice herself to have sovereignty over her own body, to have autonomy over her own body, to say it's okay for the government to decide
yeah.
seems like it's a huge violation of freedom, you know?
Well, I think you're bringing up a really great point that, a man killing in a war, he's kind of absolved of the murder. And I think the idea behind that is his nature, is to protect and go out and like hunt, gather, kill, etc., etc. Whereas if a woman has an abortion, it's against her nature theoretically, because her job is to bring forth life.
Let's read a couple other of these quotes because I think they're really great food for thought. So here's one. This was we talked about this a little bit, but this was sort of towards the beginning of her book. Women, woman is lost. Where are the women? Today's women are not women. We have seen what these mysterious slogans mean in the eyes of men and the legions of women who see through these eyes. It is not enough to have a woman's body or to take on the female function as lover and mother to be a real woman. It is possible for the subject to claim autonomy through sexuality and maturity. And the real woman is one who accepts herself as other. The duplicitous attitude of men today creates a painful split for women. They accept, for the most part, that woman be a peer, an equal, and yet they continue to oblige her to remain the inessential. For her, these two destinies are not reconcilable. She hesitates between them without being exactly suited to either, and that is the source of her lack of balance. So I love this quote because it really resonated with me in different ways. And I'm in 2025, but I often feel this kind of internal conflict with the need for romance, to the need to love and be loved with a man, but also the need to be independent and not be defined as an extension of my boyfriend. I don't want to be
Sure.
defined as an extension of someone else. And so there's these kind of conflicting wants and needs, the need to be love and be loved in a romantic relationships, and then the need to have my own identity, that's not dependent and not relative to my significant other. So I really resonated with that. I mean, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, what you just described, I think that it's people like to act as though partnerships, because that's what relationships are, is you're a partner. They act like it's so easy, and it's really easy to lose yourself. I think that the part where she says they continue to oblige her to remain the inessential, because man is essential, woman is not essential, even though that's definitely not true. Everybody's essential. Um, I I think that the line where it says the woman who accepts herself as the other, she's the real woman. Would you think of that as like women who can like weaponize their sexuality? They've like accepted that they're an object in men's eyes, and therefore they've like taken the concept of being the other and taken control of it in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's one way of looking at it. Like, okay, well, I'm just going to accept that I'm always going to be objectified by men or by women. I'm always going to be a sexual object. So I'm just going to embrace it and use it to my advantage and create an OnlyFans account or, you know what I mean? Um, I think that's a fair, I think women should have the freedom to do what they want with their bodies. And so if that makes them happy, objectifying themselves and just sort of like um uh kind of playing that game of like, okay, well, I'm going to be objectified anyway, so I'm just going to like work with the system and make the most of it. So if she's happy doing that, I'm not going to say that's like wrong or unethical or anything. But I don't know if it helps bring about equality.
Right.
Um, and I also don't know if I don't know if the objectification of a woman as other. Uh, I just I don't know what we can do honestly to kind of rise above that. Because this notion of male, female, and this notion of men and women are still, you don't look at someone and call them. I mean, nowadays we have these pronouns that are like you can call me she, he, they, but that's just sort of starting to emerge. I mean, we may be heading to a society where everyone is comfortable being non-binary and identifying as they. And I do question, like, is that the healthiest route, or is that sort of defying something natural
Mm,
that separates men and women. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah. Well, apparently these days you can't, you know, they is not a thing anymore according to the government.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But I definitely think that it does talking about just gender identity in general, it really does beg the question, what's the point of any of it, you know?
Yeah.
What is the point? Could we all just use the same pronoun? You
Hmm.
know, uh, it's an interesting question. It really
And
is.
what
And
kind
it's
of
all about like your self-perception, which is totally based off of how other people treat you.
Right. It's hard to have your own self-perception without taking into consideration how everyone perceives you. Like it's hard to separate your self-worth, your self-image with how others perceive you. I don't know if you can separate that. I mean, I would like to think, well, I'm gonna see myself for how I want to see myself, no matter how anyone else sees me. But
Sure.
is that responsible? Like, is that because we're all interdependent in some way, shape, or form. We're social creatures, we need each other to survive and procreate at least. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I definitely think treating everyone equally, whether they're male, female, um, or they, them, like I feel like everyone deserves fair treatment. But what would society look like if gender was not a thing? Like if we stopped identifying each other as masculine, feminine, male, female, and we just called each other human or them, what kind of society would that be? I'm trying to imagine it, and I
I've
can't quite get a clear vision. Can
I've
you?
never I've never even contemplated that, and I think that it is an interesting question because it is a very, you know, it makes life a bit more easy to understand when you pit things against each other, when you pit concepts against each other. So if the idea is that men and women are opposites, you know, that way you can say, "Oh, I'll predict this is how this person will behave," etc., etc. It seems that as a culture, the way that we like to understand each other is through these stereotypes, you know, which are stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another great quote that you found here that I really like. This goes back to views of women in the military. Um, it is not in giving life, but in risking life that the man is raised above the animal. That is why superiority has been accorded in humanity, not to the sex that brings forth, but to which that kills. And it must be said, in addition, that the men with the most scrupulous respect for embryonic life are also those who are most zealous when it comes to condemning adults to death and war. So that's sort of what I was touching on earlier about um, men are glorified for killing other humans in war, and yet oftentimes those same men are very much advocating pro-life, like so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Nobody wants to be pro-abortion. Nobody wants abortions to happen.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Just like nobody wants wars to happen. I refuse to believe that war is really the solution. I think that if we all grew up from the dawn of time and uh not what's the word, paternal societies, if it was more like maternal leadership, I really wonder how different it would be. I wonder if we would have developed another form of dispute management than literally murdering each other with long metal sticks.
Yeah. Well, in my psychology classes in college, I learned about the amygdala and the brain and how, one side of our brain is more associated with logic and the other side of the brain is more affiliated with emotion. And there were a lot of studies on female brains and male brains. And the female brain showed that the amygdala was actually more active, which suggested that women are actually better at balancing logic and emotion, as opposed to the stereotype that women are more emotionally driven. That no, women are actually better at balancing both, whereas men are more logically driven. The
And
stereotype, right? So I
right.
found that study really interesting. I learned about it in college. Uh, so,
Yeah. Well, and I think, as a society, men are pressured to avoid being emotional, right?
hmm
And yet at the same time, anger it seemingly is one of the only emotions they're allowed to publicly indulge in. It's an
hmm
emotion, and causing a lot of problems.
hmm
You know, if you look at this big picture, it is quite interesting. I don't, I was telling my mom the other day, I think that in history, whenever a woman is described as nagging, all that means is that she was the smartest person in the room and nobody wanted to listen to her. And that they were actually just trying to discredit her or disrespect her to make you stop listening. Because if you listened to the nagging woman, you wouldn't have as much fun, or you would have to pay attention to logic for once.
hmm
Um, yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I hate that stereotype of like a nagging woman. What makes her naggy? Just because she's pointing out like a flaw in logic or something that's like inconsiderate or what makes her naggy? Like
A
why
nagging man. Have you
yeah,
ever heard somebody say that?
I've never heard someone say that. Uh
A mouthy man.
Yeah. But you brought up a very interesting point about men, well, especially like the average American man in American society, is often raised to, play sports. And if you show emotion, that means you're not as masculine. That means you're not as strong. And which I think is a false narrative because I think emotional awareness, emotional intelligence is more masculine. It's more of a turn on for me, and I'm attracted to guys that are in touch with their emotions
Oh
and
yeah.
that they can process their emotions and express their emotions in a healthy way, as opposed to letting their anger turn them into some irrational being, right?
Yeah.
So I don't really like how um, it still is sort of taught that like okay, men shouldn't cry kind of thing, and then if a man cries that means you're wimpy or you're weak, but in the reality, in my opinion, is that it takes strength to cry. It takes strength to allow yourself to feel those hard emotions and to express them in a healthy way. Because if you don't process your emotions, that can physically make you ill, and that can turn you into a really unpleasant, unlikable person, with all these psychological issues. So
Yeah.
emotions are part of being human, and to say that like, oh, women are more emotional and that makes them weaker or that makes them crazier, it's just not true, in my opinion.
No. No. It's a human thing to be emotional. We just have decided that showing emotions is weak, aka feminine.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're able to balance logic and emotion and to make decisions based on both, those decisions are probably wiser. Because if you're making decisions that are purely logical or purely emotional, then something's missing. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to be able to handle both and make decisions based on both.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, I mean, just going back to these gender roles and how we can kind of break free from them, or should we break free from them? One of the things that Boudoir talks about in the book, which I found interesting, is that it's really, she seems to suggest that it's really up to a woman to break free from a stereotype. So, if society is pressuring her to get married and have kids as opposed to joining the workforce or pressuring her to do X, Y, and Z, it's really up to her to choose a different path. Because if you are fleeing your freedom and just letting your partner control you, right? Letting the man control you and letting him sort of like be the breadwinner, um, and letting him sort of define you as this limited, like all I do is stay at home and cook and clean, or all those stereotypes, then you're just enabling that stereotype. It might be easier. I mean, it would be a lot easier life for me. It would be easy if I just got married and let a man work and pay all the bills, and then I could just relax at home and cook and clean. That would be a lot easier. That would be a lot more boring. Like I wouldn't be happy doing that myself. And I've always enjoyed making my own money, feeling self-sufficient. I don't like it when a man pays it for me. I like to be fair, like split everything 50-50 kind of thing. That's just me. But is that to say that it's wrong if a woman does choose the traditional, 1930s, like stay at home wife? Like, is that, you know what I'm saying? Like, is that lifestyle just as valid if she is sort of accepting the stereotype? Um,
I think it's whatever you want it to be. I know a
mhm,
lot of stay-at-home moms who are super happy and that's kind of like their chosen vocation. I
mhm,
definitely think that Beauvoir was uh she was an unusual woman in that, she dated Jean-Paul Sartre and she was I don't believe she ever got married or had kids. And I watched this interview with her earlier today where she was talking about how um she always felt equal and supported as an intellectual because in, school in Paris, she was never treated as though she was less than for being a woman because it didn't matter. All that mattered is what she was presenting. Um, so I think that it's a good question. I think that, I've met people who have sort of gone the route of like, oh, I'm not going to get married, I'm not going to have kids. And then they hit the age of like 45 and they're like, "Oh my God, what have I done? I like missed the boat or something," you know. Um, and this also the inverse as well for men who choose to be the stay-at-home dad. That's such a unique thing that doesn't happen. I mean, it might be more common these days for sure.
mhm.
But I think that any man that I've ever met who's been a stay-at-home dad has told me, "Oh yeah, people give me like weird looks sometimes, and they act like it's a very strange thing that, and I'm just here taking care of my kid." You know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still a weird thing. Like people still will look at a man and be like, "Oh, you're the stay-at-home dad, huh? That's interesting." Like we might
Yeah,
not
she's got
judge.
you whipped.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and going back to relationships and love, is the healthiest form of love one where there's like an equality between the two people, or is it actually healthy if one is a little more domineering over the other, right? If one is sort of the bread maker and then the other one stays at home, like is that dynamic healthier, or is it, and then, what defines love? Is love defined by equality and reciprocal and like balance and fairness, or is love defined by just an agreement that, okay, you're gonna do this and I'm gonna do this, and then we're gonna, so this book also raises questions about love and relationships and our role within loving relationships, which can be hard to navigate as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I saw this going back to the whole thing with social media these days and people being like, I need to live in my feminine energy more and vice versa. I saw this video one time where men they are taking care of the woman's external world and she should not be preoccupied with this at all. And then he comes home from work and the woman's job is to take care of his internal world. So like his emotional state.
Mhm.
Um and I think that that is like if that's the thing that floats your boat, for sure, go for that. But I also think that if you flip it around, I don't think that anybody should exist in such stringent boxes where a woman is supposed to not concern herself with the news, not concern herself with anything outside of her four walls.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I I think that it really is what makes you happy. I think that nobody is happy though when they're stuck doing only like they're stuck in a lane and there's no getting out of the lane. I don't know if there's a simple solution to that though. It'd be great if like they each had a job where they worked 30 hours a week. They evenly split the household work, but we all know that that's not a thing, you know?
Yeah.
I think especially it gets more complicated if you have kids too, because there is
Hmm.
always going to be somebody who is the primary caretaker.
Yeah.
Um, because that's kind of how it happened. In old societies, they used to, have kids, and the villagers would like raise the kids together, or like the women in the village at least. And I
Yeah.
often wonder, is that the solution? You know, like the men can go off and like do dumb stuff, and then the women can just do their thing and like, take turns taking care of everybody. But I also
Yeah.
think that if I had lived back then, I know for a fact I would have been like, I want to go out there. I don't want to take care of the kids, you know? And I think that it really just comes down to what do you want to do and
Yeah.
what floats your boat.
Yeah, I think that's a great point is how do we figure out what makes us happy if we feel confined to one particular role? We need to have the freedom to explore different lifestyles, to explore different types of roles and different to figure out what makes us happy because, a woman may join the workforce and be single for a long time and then realize she's not happy and then get married, have kids, stay at home, and then find happiness in that and vice versa. So it's like, but we can't figure out what makes us happy if we only do what we think society wants us to do. Um, like I talk to some women and they seem very like surprised that I don't want kids, that I've
Hmm.
never been interested in wanting kids. Or
Yeah.
I've actually talked to men too who will often like try to, wait, what? You really don't want kids? Like it's like dumbfounding. Like how could you not want kids? You really don't want kids? Like
Yeah.
it's in 2025. Like you would think that that would be more like widely acceptable. But it still happens. Like people are shocked when like a woman doesn't want kids. Like
Well, I think it's like the traditional destiny, right? You're saying I want a different destiny,
yeah.
and people don't know what to do with that.
Right. I just want to leave some sort of lasting impact on the world and create some sort of positive impact. I don't have to have kids to do that.
Hmm.
So, but my point is like these societal constraints about gender roles, they're still here in 2025. And so even though this book was written in 1941, it's reading it was really fascinating and it's still interesting because I'd like to think that we've had a lot of progress in terms of treating each other with more equal opportunity. I still feel like we have a long way to go. And I don't even know what an ideal society quite looks like. Like when I try to imagine, well, what would a utopia look like where everyone's treated equally? Should everyone be treated equally? Like, is that the ideal society or like it's hard for me to kind of fathom what an ideal society would even look like because many people have different things that make them happy and different conflicting wants and needs.
Yeah. Yeah, her book is more relevant now, I would say, than ever. I'm sure that there's a few chapters of it that could be revised, you know. Um, I don't know if women could have their own credit cards. You know, I think that happened in the 70s, maybe. That was
Somewhere
not a
around
thing
there.
for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, Voting, obviously. Uh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and now there's this modern push towards gender fluidity. So that definitely challenges these rigid roles. But the struggle between autonomy and social expectations, it still kind of remains. So, yeah, I mean, and it also raises the question, if woman is something learned rather than innate, can it be unlearned? Right?
Oh, that's a
And if
question.
so, what a world without fixed gender roles would look like.
That is a great question. Sorry, my dog wants to get on screen real
Oh,
quick.
hello. What do
What do
you
you think,
think?
Crispin?
What do you think?
He says, "I
Yeah.
don't know, I'm a dog."
But
No,
yeah,
like yeah, a
I think
world
it's a great
without fiction.
question. But I just I don't have the answer. That's why I think it's important to ask these questions. And I think it's important to continue to have these conversations. And, it's okay to not have all the answers. But um, any other thoughts before we say goodnight?
I think we did a sorry, let me put him down. He's
No,
looking at
it's
his phone.
fine.
Um,
You can join.
yeah, no, I think that we covered a lot of it. I think it's a very important book, and I I'd like to continue like taking a deeper dive on it sometime because I think that it's I wish that everybody could read it.
Yes, if you're listening and you haven't read this book, I highly recommend reading it cover to cover. And let us know what you think. Comment below, join the conversation. Let us know what you think about a woman's role in society and how that relates to individual freedom and love. Let us know. I'd be very curious to whether you agree with some of the things we said or disagree. I'd be curious to hear from you. So. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. This was a really interesting conversation. It's got my wheels turning, and now I'm going to keep thinking about it.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah, this was fun.
Um,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, anytime. All right, well, signing off for now. Stay curious, everyone. Stay open-minded, and take care.